For today's video, I'm gonna do a relatively budget-focused gaming build with this at its core, which is the Intel i5-12400F, and I can't wait to unsheath the CPU and put it to work. But before we get into the build, a word from today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Linode, a company that's been awarded by me as having the best name to say. Just give it a try. Linode. It feels good, doesn't it? Linode is a Linux-based cloud computing and web hosting service that offers multiple products to manage cloud storage, websites, databases, game servers, Kubernetes, and they can even handle whatever computational load you can imagine. And regardless of what service you decide to go with, you will get access to award-winning customer support. If all of this sounds good to you, sign up to Linode using the link in my description below to get a 60-day $100 free credit. Thank you, Linode, for sponsoring today's video. Oh yeah, that is the business right there. And this is actually one of the main reasons why I specifically went with the 12400F, is because it came with the new Intel stock cooler. So it's like a whole plastic shroud that goes around it, and you can see that only this bit is actually heatsink, which I didn't realize until now, until seeing it in person. That's madness. Although, despite the plastic codpiece, this is still a very exciting cooler because, you know, it's the newest member of a CPU cooler family equivalent of that family from Parasite. So yeah, I can't wait to give this a try. Now, some of you may have noticed that in the beginning of the video, I was sitting next to a Be Quiet case, and this is definitely not a Be Quiet case. And the reason for that is it seems like that Be Quiet case took a detour through the gulag while being shipped here, and it sustained a bit of damage, so I couldn't use it. So I used this XPG Defender instead, which was a pretty easy case to build in. The inside looks like any relatively modern case, although I'm not entirely sold on the aesthetics of it from the outside. It looks a bit like something that's role-playing as a prop in Game of Thrones, and I don't love that, but it does have mesh in the front, so that's good. Other than that, let's talk a bit about the parts that we have in here. I've already mentioned the Intel 12400F that we have in here, which is a 6-core, 12-thread little beastie Intel CPU. RAM-wise, we've got 16 gigs of DDR4 running at 3200 megahertz. It's a HyperX kit, and the motherboard is a Gigabyte Z690 UDAX DDR4. And then finally, graphics card-wise, we have this. Well, it's a bit of a meme of a graphics card, but you'll see later it performs pretty well at 1080p. It's a 6600 XT, and it's the Power Color Hellhound version. So with that, let's have a look at some benchmarks to see how this performs. When it comes to gaming performance, realistically the system is as much power as anybody needs. You can play pretty much any game at 1080p with relatively high settings and still have a 60 plus frame rate experience. And in terms of frame pacing, the system was also solid. Even Battlefield 5 running in DX12, which is usually quite prone to stutters, was relatively smooth. And the CPU temperatures aren't that bad. I was expecting mild chemical furnace from that new Intel stock cooler, but that's a pretty solid result. Although, the CPU is very gently sipping power here, so that's probably most of the reason why. And it's quite noisy. It's not like Banshee trapped in a bear trap shouty, but it's pretty close. Under load, it's definitely audible, and in standard stock Intel cooler fashion, it's a really irritating frequency of whine. Now this performance is all well and good, but we do need to compare it to something. Luckily, I got a Ryzen 5 5600X in an Alienware system I recently bought. So let's drop the same graphics card in there with the same memory configuration and see what's what. Now when it comes to that comparison, that is just damn, that's pretty good. Although there are a couple of things that we need to bear in mind. Like I mentioned before, the 5600X is running in an Alienware, which means you don't really have any control over the CPU. It's just running in Alienware mode. Although it does boost to 4.65 gigahertz and had a max power draw of about 75 watts, which is decent for a 5600X. And the other thing that you need to bear in mind is that the GPU was a bottleneck in a bunch of these situations. So a faster graphics card may lead to a bigger gap. Having said that, a lot of the games that had a margin of error result, the CPU utilization was surprisingly similar. And some of the results, the 12400F was just solidly doing better than the 5600X, which is a much more expensive CPU. I wasn't really expecting that. And then I did some Cinebench tests where, again, like what? That's good. Although, despite this very impressive performance, it is a new CPU on a new platform, which means there are a couple of growing pains that I think is worth discussing. Growing pain number one is motherboard pricing. Even surprisingly losery looking B660 motherboards are more expensive than you'd imagine, and that does take away from the value proposition of the CPUs somewhat. And this is actually still one of AMD's real strong points. Considering how long AM4 has been around, you can get a solid budget AM4 motherboard for like a handful of pocket lint and a couple of toe picks. Whereas you'd need some primo toe picks to get even a budget Intel board for this new platform. Although availability is pretty good, like you can get even budget motherboards in stock, and the availability for the CPUs is really good. Like you can already find 12th gen CPUs on sale, which is like Intel, I don't think you know what year we're living in. Like selling a product below MSRP, like you're clearly confused. I'm not complaining though, it's amazing, which makes me feel really hopeful for the up and coming Intel GPU launch. Yeah, if they carry over that same mentality, that'll go a long way to help me forgive them for the terrible things that they've done to us in the past. Looking at you, quad-core CPUs. But anyway, the final growing pain that I want to mention, it is very difficult to find a cooler that's willing to sit on an LGA 1700 CPU, especially when it comes to air coolers. And the problem is quite weird as well, because you'll go onto like an Amazon product page for a cooler, and it'll have listed compatibility for LGA 1700, and then you buy the cooler and get it, and then realize that the actual mounting hardware didn't come in the box, which is really irritating. Like it means that it's not compatible out of the box, and then you have to like order the hardware from the manufacturer and stuff. That's a bit inconvenient. Like I don't love that. Asus does have a solution to this problem though. Some of their motherboards, and emphasis on the some here, has both LGA 1700 and 1200 mounting holes drilled in, which is a really awesome feature. I love when they do that. Although that's only happens when you buy like a Strix board or whatever. If you buy like a normal Prime B660 board, they only have the LGA 1700 holes in there. So yeah, that's a bit inconvenient for the budget buyer. So in conclusion, it's good. It's just good, solid. Teething problems, but good. If only graphics cards were affordable to the point where we didn't have to rob ATMs anymore to be able to buy a graphics card. It would actually be a pretty good time to buy a gaming PC at the moment. That's not the case though. Hopefully Intel just floods the market with GPUs and that helps stabilize the prices and stuff. That'll be really awesome. It's not the case yet, but who knows? Fingers crossed. Let's hope it gets better. But yeah, with that, thank you very much for watching the video. If you like it, like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. And until the next video, bye-bye.